to hear your word, to be inspired by your life, to have our hearts touched and lives transformed by your presence. Gracious Lord, speak unto us now, whether in spite of me or through me. For this we pray. Amen. College ball was a little tight after I sing so much, so. God is searching us out. He is seeking us wherever we are and whoever we are. He is trying to offer us His love. The idea that God searches us out is an idea that as Methodists we hold dear, the idea of prevenient grace, which says that even before we are aware of God in the world, God is aware of us, loves us, and longs for us to come back. It is an idea that God still sees us as good despite our flaws and mistakes, and that He wishes us to be a part of His family, wishes us to find salvation and eternal life. Our story this morning is the story of Zacchaeus, and it's not a story that traditionally is tied to prevenient grace, but it is a story that I feel kind of captures this idea of God searching us out. Now the story, to be fair, begins long before our scripture actually begins of it. Zacchaeus, until he encounters Christ, is really not that important, but his story and who he is in the world is important to the 10 passages that we hear about him in the life of Christ. You see, our story begins actually with the Roman Empire and the life choices that Zacchaeus makes to bring him into being a tax collector and to being wealthy. And the reason it begins so much before Jesus is because the Roman Empire had a particular way of governing over their provinces. And the way that they governed is they often would find people from those provinces who were willing to be promoted to be overseers. And they felt that when they recruited people from the area, they were more likely to know the region better, and they were more likely to be able to prevent uprisings and those kind of things. And so every position in the Roman Empire, in the governorship outside of the soldiers and outside of the kind of the regional governors that came from Rome, were kind of outsourced to the locals. This includes the tax collectors. And so the way that Roman tax collecting kind of worked was that Rome would come up with a quota for their province and their region, and then the tax collector for the region would give a quota down to each little subsector, and that subsector would give a quota down to each little tiny community, and each community would have a tax collector that gave his quota down to the individual tax collectors, and so they would all have these quotas that they had to meet. Now, to get their salary, they were allowed to collect more than the quota. That in actuality, under the Roman system, the tax collectors were allowed to collect as much money as they wanted, so long as they met their quota for their region. And so you have this kind of legal means of extortion or legal means of robbery set up in the system, because the tax collectors would receive the quota, and some of them would say, okay, the government wants me to collect 10 denarii for this area. I'm going to collect 50 denarii, and the other 40 I get to keep. And you can kind of see how, and they have the Roman soldiers there to back them as they make these decisions. So we have Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a Jew, a Judean, who was born there in the region. He was like his neighbors, and most likely when he started out, he was probably quite poor. And somewhere along the lines, he accepted a position as a tax collector within the Roman Empire. This would make him a traitor to his neighbors. He has now decided that he is going to take the side of the evil occupying army that is suspending Israelite freedom and that is causing problems. And as this tax collector, Zacchaeus, it says, became rich, and he actually became a chief tax collector, which means he was an overseer of tax collectors. And he essentially brought in a lot of money. Now, not only is he a traitor to his people by choosing to serve the Roman Empire, this government that these people don't want to be under, this oppressing government, but he also, as a tax collector, probably upset a lot of people. Because as tax collectors, he was free to tell anyone whatever taxes he wanted to charge them. So one man could come forward and he could arbitrarily say, you owe me a denarii. Another man could come forward and if he didn't like that man or something, he could say, you owe me 10 denarii, or so on and so forth. And if someone could not pay the taxes that he charged, they were sent off into slavery. He really would not have been a popular person. I mean, if you think about how popular our IRS people are nowadays, they actually have a set formula in which they collect taxes, and there's no arbitrary, I can take this from you just because I don't like you or whatever. It's you have to pay X number of dollars, and that's what you do. Zacchaeus got to charge whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. And if you didn't pay his taxes, you became a slave. You lost everything. And in many cases, it also resulted in many atrocities and things being done to family members as well. That your family members may also pay the price for you being unable to pay whatever taxes he set. So here's this man. He's betrayed his people. He's become wealthy off of his neighbors. He's been exiled from all of the religious institutions, the synagogue and the temple, because the priests and those in charge deemed him unloved by God for siding with the Romans and for essentially stealing from his neighbors, even though it was legal. And he hears about this religious figure coming to town, this man who apparently heals the sick and feeds the poor, this man who is able to stump those religious leaders that have banned him from the temple. And he wants to see him. He wants to just see this person and maybe get the measure of him. Because after all, he hears this news and he's just as curious as anyone else. And so when Jesus comes to Jericho and he's planning to pass through, Zacchaeus goes out to try to see him. And when he gets there, he finds that the crowds have already gathered. And because of the multitudes and the size of the crowds, he cannot see Jesus. It says that he is short of stature, and he cannot see over the crowds. Now, the thing about that phrase, he is short of stature, it's not specific with the pronoun as to who it's implying. That either Zacchaeus may have been a short man that couldn't see over the crowds that were taller than him, or Jesus may have been the short man, and despite Zacchaeus being normal height, because Jesus was shorter than the crowds in front of or around him, he couldn't see him. Regardless, someone was short, either Zacchaeus or Jesus, and the crowds were too thick to see him. And I like to imagine that it's Zacchaeus that's short, and I like to think about how the crowds might have looked. I can imagine maybe Zacchaeus started off at first by trying to jump up and see over the crowds and see what everyone was talking about. And when jumping was clearly not going to work, maybe he tried to push his way into the crowds. And I can just imagine people kind of stepping closer together to block him out because they don't really like him. And so Zacchaeus realizes that he's not going to get to see Jesus through the crowds. And he runs on ahead. He knows kind of the way through town. And so he goes on ahead and he goes and climbs a sycamore tree there on Jesus' route through town. And he gets up on the branches ready to see Jesus. Just to see this figure who's passing through town. And as Jesus passes under the sycamore tree, Jesus stops and looks up at him and says, Zacchaeus, come down out of that tree. For tonight, I am staying with you. It says that Zacchaeus scrambled out of that tree. He came down out of that tree as fast as he could, and he gladly received Christ into his home. And he begins to show him the way to his house. And as they're walking, he begins to hear the crowds around him. And the crowds begin to grumble. And he hears what they're saying. He is going to stay with and be a guest of a man who is a sinner. Now, whether Zacchaeus was worried that Christ would change his mind and hear that he was a sinner, or whether he was worried that people would think less of Christ, or some combination thereof, or something else, we don't know. But in that moment, when he hears the words of the crowd, and when he realizes who this person is that's coming to honor him by being a guest at his house over all of the other people in town, he stops there in his tracks. And he turns to Jesus and he says, Lord, behold, half of everything I own I will give to the poor. And if there is anyone I have defrauded, anyone that I have wronged, I will pay them back 4 times what I owe. Jesus looks at Zacchaeus and says loud enough so the crowd can hear, today salvation has come to this house. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. That morning, when Zacchaeus woke up, he probably never expected to speak with this holy figure. When he woke up that morning, he probably never thought that this religious person would even notice him, let alone consider to honor him by being a guest at his house. That morning, he probably didn't realize that he was about to meet the Son of the living God, face to face. He probably was not thinking that I'm going to get up today and I'm going to give away half of everything I own. And you know what? I'm going to take a step further. I am going to apologize and make amends to all the people that I have wronged throughout my life. That seems like something good I'm going to do today. That probably was nowhere near the thoughts on his mind. It was probably going to be a pretty ordinary day, other than the fact that there was this figure coming through town, that this spectacle that he may be able to go and witness, that, maybe in the future he'd be able to talk about with people, but it wasn't going to change his life. It was just going to be a story. And yet by that evening, it is clear that Jesus had planned to find him along that route. That even though Zacchaeus may have not expected any of this to happen, Jesus knew that if he found him in that tree, that if he asked him to come down, and that if he chose to be a guest at his house, that it would change Zacchaeus' life forever. And that this man who had been living lost, this man who had not been treating his neighbors very well, this man who had come to the point where he may have even believed that God had rejected him, just as the synagogues and the temples had, that this man would come to know that the bridge between him and God was not permanently broken. This man would come to know that God was still in love with him despite all of the things that he may have done wrong, and that God was seeking him out even when he was not ready and prepared to come to God. I can't think of a better way to show you prevenient grace than the story of Zacchaeus. God and Jesus sought him out when he was not expecting God to even care. And he brought him in to salvation. God is searching each and every one of us out. He is searching each and every person out that are outside of these walls. And it doesn't matter what other people may say about them. The grumbling of the crowds mean nothing to God. It doesn't matter whether the person has become so guilt-ridden and thinks that they themselves are unworthy of God's love. God says, I love you and I want you to be a part of my family. I want to stay with you this night. Each and every person is being sought out by God. As Jesus, he came to seek and to save that which was lost. This Lent, may we each reflect on the fact that no matter how much we may have done wrong, no matter what sins we may have stacked up, no matter how far we may have turned from God or how much we have strayed, God is seeking us out. And no matter how vile or how unworthy we may think someone out there is to be a Christian and to be loved by God, God tells us that he loves them and he is seeking them out as well. He is calling out to them and he wants them to know him. And he wants to be a guest in their house and a part of their lives. May we be the people that continue to extend Jesus' invitation to those who are broken and lost in this world. Those who need Jesus to stand beneath their sycamore tree and to call them down and say, tonight I am staying with you. May we be the people that invite others, whether worthy or unworthy in our eyes, to Jesus' table and allow them to feast and be a part of his family. May we be the people of Easter, the people of God. Amen.